Hi, as we get started with this course, I wanted to take the opportunity to share with you a little bit about my journey with classroom discussion, and then also to share a few tips with you all as you're getting started in developing your why. So, to me, there have always been three things that are super important for students to learn and practice when they are with me in my classroom, just because I feel that they are so necessary for success later on in life. So, they are reading, writing, and speaking. Now, reading and writing get a lot of attention throughout the elementary grades and then also some in middle and in high school, though their courses kind of expand. English shrinks down to just a small portion of their day. So, anyway, speaking, I feel like, is the most overlooked of all of the skills that we teach and that we practice in schools. Skills like speaking are things that help us get what we want in life, and it's something that you can learn. It's not something where either you're good at it automatically or you're not good at it, though you might be like me and start out where, whoa, I was not good at it at all, and it took a lot of practice and time in order to improve as a public speaker. So these are the things that I want most for my students. I want you all to think about, what do you want for your students? What's most important that they walk away from your classroom with? So, as I mentioned, I was not a born public speaker. Not at all. In fact, when I was in high school and college, I avoided public speaking like the plague. Every college class that I went to, when I showed up on day one, I would take a look at the syllabus, see if public speaking was a requirement. And then if it was, I usually would scoot on out of there and find another class to take. Long story short, I wound up as a classroom teacher, which was wild to me. It was a huge challenge, but it was something that I felt was so important and worthwhile that I was willing to take that risk and to be super afraid for the first several weeks and months. My hands didn't stop shaking until probably about October when I was speaking in front of my 11th grade students. So, my feeling is I've gone from being a very shy and introverted person to being a teacher to now being an instructional coach, where one of the major things that I love to work on with my teachers is talking about the balance of teacher talk time versus student talk time, and really trying to get to a place where students are talking and engaging more, because the ones who are doing the talking are the ones who are doing the learning. So, what I think is that it's super important to go ahead and to give our students practice in speaking abilities. Now, there's a couple of other things that fall under essential skills for students under that reading, writing, and speaking umbrella, okay, or within it. So, purposeful reading, giving students an opportunity to say, okay, well, here's a text that you're going to read. But here's why. Here's what you're going to be looking for as you're engaging in this text. Go find it and see what you think. That's something that makes it more impactful, I believe, when we give students text to engage with. Now, also thinking about arguments, right? We generally like it as people when we're hearing some kind of support or some kind of reasoning behind an argument, and we want our students to develop those skills so that what they say is convincing and that it's true, and that they are able to provide evidence as support for their thinking. We also want them to develop the skill of questioning. Now, questioning is also a skill, and it falls under the umbrella of speaking and then also of reading. Because when students read, we want them to be actively questioning and be curious about, well, why is it this way? And why did the author say it like this? And why was this detail included? Why was this thing not included? And we also want them to be curious when they are speaking and engaging with each other. And then, of course, that leads me to active listening. We want students to be able to listen actively to their peers or to future colleagues in the workplace or with their spouse or loved ones or whatever. We want them to be able to be a good listener and to really recognize, okay, so this is what this person is telling me. Here's why they are telling me this. Here's some thinking that I would like to share in return, right? These are lifelong skills. Now, Obviously, it's something that requires a fair amount of practice. So, what I started with as a teacher, and what I would also recommend for you all, is having some discussion structures in your classroom that are just simple protocols. I love critical thinking routines, they're absolutely wonderful. You'll be exposed to a whole bunch of those through this course. I borrow a lot of things from Project Zero, which is work that came out of Harvard, and some other places as well. So you'll get all the links and info on that. So, introducing structures, but then also providing practice. Students need to have time to practice. And sometimes that's something that's really casual, and it might be something like a turn and talk, or it might be a stand and chat, as I used to like to call them, and so on. But we want to make sure to give them practice so that they can get more comfortable. And then also reflection and growth, both for ourselves and for students, right? We want to think about, okay, well, where are students starting from? How would they self-assess themselves? And then where do they see that they want to grow? What's their ideal state as a speaker? What do they want to be able to do? And as teachers, for us to reflect on, well, how did that really go? What would I maybe like to change for next time? If we do this routine again, what are some things that I will make sure to do so that I can help my students be more successful? So, I've worked with a lot of teachers in the classroom, and many of them have said, yes, that sounds really exciting. I definitely want to have more discussion going on in my classroom. And they also are fearful of losing control. They're going, well, what happens if they don't talk? Or what happens if it just goes way off course and it's off tangent? Or they might say, you know what, I just don't have time for this in my regular curriculum. I've got so much packed in that I need to do that I don't have time to work on speaking in the classroom. I need to be able to give it to them so that they can get it quickly so we can move on. And then teachers also sometimes wonder about, well, what about in terms of assessment? How do I score something like that? How do I help students to self-evaluate? What does that look like exactly? Those are all things that we will tackle in this course. So, in order to create a culture of conversation, there's a few things that you'll need to be thinking about. One is you need to design provocative questions in the first place. You have to invite students to talk, but you have to make them want to talk. So you need to craft prompts that invite multiple perspectives, where it's not just a closed question with one set answer, but where people can have a variety of opinions, or they can bring in support from many different places in order to share their thinking. You also want to balance risk with support. You don't want to provide something that's way out there in left field, way too risky. We are teachers in the teaching profession. We always have to consider the age level of our learners and what's appropriate for the classroom talk versus maybe home talk and so on. So we want to make sure to create safe spaces for students where all voices can be heard. We also want to make sure that all students support and encourage and welcome each other to engage in the discussion. But it has to be a balance, right? Of, okay, is this just tantalizing and risky enough for us to talk about today? How am I going to support my learners through this if something should come up that maybe goes a little too far? You also want to make sure that you are curating engaging texts. This means that you're providing materials to students where they actually want to read them. They're going, ooh, that sounds really interesting, or oh, what can I learn from this? Maybe I can grab some information that will help me in this particular text. And when I say text, I do mean a variety of types of text, not just things that you sit and you read in front of your face, but maybe it's videos. Maybe it's audio. Maybe there's some sort of podcast that you might like them to listen to. All of those things in my book are considered to be texts, right? And you also want to make it routine. You want to make it where, hey, students, just so you know, in our classroom, we are going to be doing this on a regular basis. I will give you plenty of practice and support and feedback to help you get better. And I promise you that you're really going to enjoy it once we get going. So your next steps in our course is you want to be thinking first about your why. Okay, start small. Think about your why. Why is it that you're here? Why did you take this course? And then what are some ways that you might get started? What would be a logical first topic for a class that you teach that students could engage in? maybe something that's small enough, but something that, or maybe it's just a single text that they're engaging in with one focused question, so that you can help them to learn how this goes. Then, throughout this course, you're going to develop a pretty extensive toolkit, I hope. You're going to learn about methods for building classroom communities so that students feel comfortable with you and with each other and that they want to talk. You're going to get some help on crafting focus questions for your discussions. You're also going to learn about some close reading strategies and some critical thinking strategies, like I mentioned before. Just different discussion formats. There are many, many different discussion formats that you can use in your classroom that are super exciting, lots of different protocols. And then you'll learn about how and when to score discussions. I'll show you a couple of ways that you could go about it. And then also ways to engage all types and levels of learners. We know that differentiation is a necessity in our classrooms. We must incorporate that, and we must make sure to meet students where they're at, and then also to provide them with challenge. So, I encourage you to reach out to me with any questions that you have as we go through this course. I want to know, what are you wondering? What would you like to know more about? What would you like to dive into? And I would be happy to provide that to you. And then also about yourselves, and then also be thinking about your students, whether past or future. Probably not present during the summer, right? But recognize that this requires a growth mindset. Nobody starts out like, oh, wow, I just had the most amazing Socratic seminar ever on the first go. Usually that's not what happens. There's a lot of good things that do happen and are worthy of celebration. And then you also think about, well, wait, how can I make this better for next time? It's one of those ongoing things. You never quite reach the peak, though you get really darn close. So thank you for being here. By the way, these slides were generated with Gamma. It is an AI tool. I highly recommend it. And then I imported it into Google Slides. I played around and I made some changes. I typed in my own notes initially, and boom, 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 created some beautiful slides for me. I encourage you to check out that tool.